Well, hey guys. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Budget Bootcamps, Best Practice, or just simply a buzzword. We're gonna cover all of these things. We're so glad that you guys are here today. But before we dive in, just a quick note that this session is being recorded, and we'll be sharing the recorded session with all the attendees after the event wraps. Hey guys, I am Tony Sousa, a friend, a fan, an ambassador with WithMe. As you may know, home of Print with Me and of course Sip with Me, coffee services and printing services. Their amenities serve over 3 billion people nationwide and are designed to elevate the resident experience and streamline on-site operations and help property teams manage costs more effectively. We're thrilled for today's conversation to talk to three incredible panelists with great experience who really bring a wealth of experience and perspective to the table. They're going to be sharing their expert takes on all things budgets, all things budget boot camps, and we're going to even talk about the market just a little bit as well, and maybe even a little AI. We'll see if we can get to that today as well. We also want to open it up for Q&A at the end as well. So be sure to be thinking about those questions. You're welcome to drop them in the chat as you go along the way as well. And also a promo that I want to tell everybody listening with the WithMe team. If you are interested in any of the WithMe products and you want to book either a 15-minute demo or maybe a budget season lunch and learn, if you do that with the WithMe team, a sales representative across the country, the exciting promotion there is if you sign a contract with me within 30 days, the first 2 months of service will be free. So we may mention that a little bit later in the end. So keep that in mind. Again, if you book something with the WithMe team, a 15-minute consultation or maybe a budget lunch and learn, the first 2 months will be free if you sign a contract within 30 days. So really cool promotion there. Without further ado, we're going to jump right into this wonderful and experienced panel. But I will, so I don't butcher all the names, although they look pretty safe, those names, but nonetheless, we'll allow you to introduce yourselves, and we'll start with Miss Cynthia Wray.
Hi, thank you, Tony. Hi, everybody. Cynthia Wray, Senior Director of Acquisitions at FPI Management. This will be my 35th year. So I have done underwriting and annual budgets for a long time.
You're flexing your experience, Cynthia. I see that. We're not aging you. You started about 5 or 7 years old, if I recall.
6 years old, Tony. Right, 6 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I also am the past president of the California Apartment Association, and FPI is a fee management company. We manage 165,000 units, and yeah, been doing this for a moment.
As the kids say, I've been doing it a minute, right? Well, welcome, Cynthia. It's great to have you here. Jason, we'll jump over to you.
Thanks, Tony. Jason Murray, president of Thrive Communities, and we are a regional property manager, about 25,000 units under management, all exclusively in the Pacific Northwest right now. So Seattle Metro, Portland Metro, state of Oregon. And I'm actually on the newer side. I've been at the seat here for a couple months. Prior to that, I spent about 10 years on the principal side, heading up asset management for another regional operator called Rise Properties Trust, buying, renovating, selling multifamily assets, which Thrive managed. So just switched over, but been through budgets for a very long time.
That's awesome. Well, welcome to the dark side. Any in one sentence or less, what's been the biggest difference from the principal side to the management leadership side?
Well, the truth be told, I actually started on the property management side, leasing, community manager. This was back in 2012.
Sure. Well,
spent some time as a regional manager. And so I've been in both sides, and I'll just say that, property management's a grind. It's a lot of work, and my team and all the industry professionals get my gratitude. It's just a different level. So, I'm in it. I'm in the trenches. It's a lot of work, but it's rewarding.
Well, that's awesome. For a person of your title and prestige, to hear that you're in the trenches, I'm sure that means a lot to your team, and I'm sure it means a lot to those listening. So, Jason, thanks for joining us today. And last but not least, the gentleman that always seems to jump into the comments and have really something inquisitive to say, Chad, thanks for joining us. Tell us a little bit about who you are, who you work for, and what you do.
Good afternoon, Tony. Thanks to you and the WithMe team for having me here today. It's good to be with you, I guess. Chad Gilford, I'm the asset manager at Gray Capital. We are a regional multifamily owner operator, almost exclusive to Indiana right now. Small guy, syndicator. So we've pushing 3,000 units. We've got one under contract right now. So I've been in multifamily for about 20 years now. I too, like Jason, started in on-site operations, actually in leasing. I was terrible at it. So the fact that I've made it this far is kind of amazing. But have worked on the corporate side for about 10 years now. And so I too have a great debt of gratitude for all the site teams who are out there doing, the really hard work and providing great experiences to all of our residents.
That's awesome, Chad. Well, your story is quite the contrary to most. Usually people are good at it and then they propel, but it sounds like you were terrible and then pivoted quickly into something you're probably a lot better at. Thanks for being on the webinar today, Chad. Great to see you and great to see everybody as well. We're gonna kind of start at the macro level. We're gonna start from the state of the market standpoint, and before we get into budgets and some of the nuances of budgets and budget boot camps, we'd love to get from your perspective. The three of you. And again, I think we have some coastal perspectives, coast to coast. I think we have some regional perspectives as well. What are you seeing in the multifamily markets in your particular portfolio? We'll say, in 2025, and feel free to sort of be broad stroked here, talking about rent growth, demand in your marketplace, not just consumer demand, but, a pipeline flow of units along the way in your markets. What are you seeing this year, and what is your team really looking at 2026 from a market standpoint? Jason, if you don't mind, we'll maybe just start your way.
Sure. Well, I'll just say that this year is not panning out the way we expected. And I think if you look at data providers, you got to take it with a grain of salt. So, we look at CoStar, we have Axiometrics, all this. They're saying about a percentage point of rent growth so far. I don't think we're seeing that. I think we're zero, if not backwards a tiny bit on real rent growth, right? Because there's a difference between what people are asking for and what gets posted and what actually happens. So, sure. I think we're still struggling. Our market, in Seattle, in Portland, everybody's been waiting for this supply demand inflection point because we've had a ton of supply and it's dropping off. And really that's been the narrative. That's what's keeping the investment world alive, is this hope that dynamic is going to shift, provided job growth maintains, supply drops, the math says rents will pop. They just haven't yet. So this is going to be honestly going to be the same story next year. Supply is down. We should see that rent growth pop. We just haven't seen it yet. And concessions are still high. Vacancies kind of hanging on. But I think real world, it's tough out there.
Yeah, pardon my. I'd love to get your take here.
Sorry, Tony, we didn't hear who you pointed to next.
Sorry. Awesome. Chad, can you hear me? We'll go with you.
Yep. Okay. All right. Yeah, for sure. So being Midwest, we certainly don't have the same volatility that a lot of the coastal markets for cities do. We're second tier city and some tertiary markets. So we've been a lot better insulated against the sort of supply imbalance that exists in a lot of the larger markets right now. That said, we've still seen a lot of just volume is down this year in terms of leads, prospects, new leases. The summer season didn't pop quite the same way. So that's down significantly, about 26% in terms of visits, lead conversion. A lot of those metrics, net leases down about 22% this year, but the big equalizer has been renewals, significantly up from last year, which I think is really sort of confirms what a lot of people are talking about, consumer behavior. Yardi Matrix, a couple of quarters now, has shown the difference about 120 to 150 basis points between, rent by necessity and lifestyle communities. So there's a significant difference between some of the upper echelon, well amenitized, core assets and some of the a little bit more workforce housing, which is a little bit more of what our portfolio is composed of. So I think there's a pretty big difference there. And I think we've got to be careful, looking at those really broad brushstrokes that come out, in terms of economic data and drivers, because I tend to take more the John Wooden approach, where you don't really look at your competitors. You've got to look at your own house first.
Yeah, I love that perspective, actually, looking at your own house first. Cynthia, obviously, you've heard the gentleman. FPI has assets across the country. I'd love to get your perspective on this.
Yeah, it's interesting on the acquisition side. It's, very soft market, and it's because FPI is so large, it's almost like its own micro economy. And I look back at all my data for all these years, and I can see when it's a recessionary period just on the number of deals that trade. And this year is like real small on when the economy was hot, we were, 15, 16, 17,000 units of acquisition work, clients buying real estate. Right. And this year it's like 4,500 right now. So deals are real hard to get done. Interest rates are still high, apartment values are down, rents are totally stagnant. And I think 2026 is going to be more of 2025. And I've been through 3 recessionary periods, not that I would consider this a recessionary period, but I can just tell by the lack of deals trading. People are having a hard time jumping into the market. Deals are taking a long time to close. Clients are going back for retrades, which hadn't happened in a very long time. So that's interesting to me, which means that the market is soft. And it's going to take some time to get past that, meaning we need to have better interest rates. Obviously, I think that's going to happen this year. And we need to button up our operations, do everything we can, which this is a budget boot camp, to, maximize our income, reduce our expenses, and have the best possible NOI for when the market is better.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, well said. All 3 of you, thank you for your perspectives. I think you guys have unique perspectives on this. How are you? I'm gonna sort of fray from some of the questions here. Just I'm gonna ask a question based on your answers, but also I think one that maybe people listening may want to know. It sounds from all 3 of you that there's a sober outlook for not just the end of 25, but 26, and that's listen, real estate is a cyclical business. We all know that, and so we know there'll be brighter days, whether it be 26 or 27. But my question to the 3 of you is, how are you sort of communicating this, for lack of a better term, down, right? Like to your teams, because, I think there's a perception sometimes, at the regional level, even property management level is, there's kind of standard numbers that we need to be including in the budget for growth, kind of year over year, 5 to 6% rent growth, right? Is sort of these standard numbers. But as you are working with your forecast team and your economic team, and also looking at the marketplace, how are you expressing this downward or across the spectrum to your team to say, hey, we're aware of what's going on in the marketplace. We want you to be as aggressive as you possibly can. And how are you expressing it? Are you having them, take a close look at their expense side of things? How are you just conveying these messages of modesty, for lack of a better term, in potential rent growth, not just in 25 reforecast, but you're looking at everyone's preparing a 26 budget now. I'll start the other way around, Cynthia, if you're willing to talk about how you're expressing this to your teams, what you're seeing, and obviously getting their feedback on based on the ground what they're seeing as well.
Yeah, it's always a couple of things for me. One, I always remind people that, you go to work and have a job and they pay you. Well, an owner of an apartment building buys an apartment building, and that in essence is their job and how they get paid. So it is us, again, we're 100% fee to maximize the return on investment every time, whether it's in an economy where, rents are growing or it's in a recessionary period. So we always have to be on our game. Secondly, I know a lot of people like to just plug in like, oh, it's acceptable to be 3 to 5% increase on expenses, which is fine in an underwriter's world. But when you actually manage an apartment building, we have to do better than that, right? We need to be looking at every single item in detail. Example, like security deposit forfeitures. It seems like a small income revenue producing item, but what are we doing to get the most security deposit back to the owner, the most income, right? Are we making sure we're inspecting the unit when the resident moves in? And looking at other apartment buildings that we manage, what's their average forfeiture? $100, and maybe someone in the market is 500. What's the difference? How do we get to be more closer to the 500? We just want to maximize income or reducing resident turnover, right? Which saves on expenses. And there's so many things that we should be doing, and we should be doing that whether we're in a recessionary market or not.
Well, what I'm hearing you say is like, hey guys, listen, we understand the market's going to market, right? Like it is what it is, but let's control the controllables better than the next guy, right? And ultimately, that's always a great way to approach it. Thank you, Cynthia, for sharing. Chad, how are you expressing some of your perspective on the marketplace this year and for next year for those writing their budgets?
Yeah, so for me, it comes down to, business planning and thoughtful business planning to, really look at where we are against pro forma and to provide good guidance. Some of that's, aspirational, but it also has to be defensible. And just to really take a look at and compelling too for the property management team to make sure we're not trying to sell them on a story that's baseless. So to get everybody on board and behind it, I think for a lot of reasons, just based on where we're located and for reasons I stated before, we're pretty well insulated with some revenue growth. So we're cautiously optimistic there. For people who have long-term fixed rate debt, if you're not over levered and you don't have to play the float and the rate cap game, and you're not worried about burning out interest reserve on a development deal, then you're probably in a pretty good place, and you're in the market that the rest of the people are with. How do you just got to stay on top of appealing your property taxes with more jurisdictions being aggressive there, trying to ratchet up their assessed values and how they're doing that. And if you're smaller like we are and you don't have a giant book of business yet, how are you approaching your insurance in a thoughtful manner and making sure you keep those rates low. But so revenue and expenses, there's probably not as much that moves the needle there, although you've got to be mindful of that. The big one is CapEx and how we're spending money below the line to really influence distributions and get back really into the investment thesis and what the intention of the deal was.
Chad, are you very well said? I love your point about obviously it needs to be aspirational, but it needs to be defensible. Very, very well put. Items below the line is your team really taking a hard look and maybe making some hard choices to not go forward with cap X items like maybe they were planned or maybe just not as aggressive. Obviously, there's a balance to taking a look at aged assets and capital expenditures that need to be done.
Yeah, I mean, my answer in multifamily or for any deal is always it depends, right? So you're usually triangulating at least 3 different variables in terms of performance metrics. And so I think that, right now we want to continue to see good revenue growth, but we also have to be careful about that outpacing wage growth. And then we're being careful about capital, but so how much of it is accretive? And then how much of it we have to make sure we're adding back to the resident experience to make sure that there's not a disconnect between the value proposition that they're counting on us to provide to their lives.
Very interesting take. Thanks for that. Jason, similar question. Obviously, you've heard the answers of the other panelists as well. Feel free to piggyback, but feel free to have your own perspective.
Yeah, I would say what we do is we hand out Thrive branded crystal balls.
I shouldn't laugh. Maybe that's a real thing.
Yeah, just gaze into it because this is the hardest question, and it's so client. it's so client perspective dependent, right?
Client centric,
So,
yeah. Mhm.
yeah, client centric. What's your perspective? Client's gonna ask the property management company, what can you do? Like, what do you mean 3% rent growth? Can't you do better? It's like, come on, like you just said, the market's the market, right? So what we typically default to is we just pick a provider, like CoStar, for example, and say we're gonna just they got the chief economist. They have, maybe talk to Jay Parson. He should come on this podcast, right?
Too expensive.
Yeah, we're gonna pick we're gonna pick a provider, and our default is just to mirror that because we don't know what's gonna happen. And so that's our default, and we'll send that out, and clients will be like, that's if they have an opinion on what the market's going to be, if they want us to be aggressive, we're going to try to be attentive to that. But it's really tough to get it right, again, without a crystal ball. And everyone thought, let's be aggressive for 2025. Aggressive meaning a few percentage points growth. That's what we underwrote. We're going to fall short now in this last part of the year because we're not getting the numbers that we underwrote. So it's challenging.
I was just going to say, you're going to have a lot of people stealing your crystal ball idea for the next budget boot camp. We'll talk about budget boot camps later, but and I know it was tongue in cheek, but it's actually probably a pretty good gag gift, as they say. Jason, you just mentioned obviously 25, the perspective in 2024 of 2025, sort of survive to 25, which was, I always thought was an interesting little tagline. It feels as though, my tagline is sort of try to exist in 26, right? Like, that seems to be the extender. What 2027 is, who knows. How are you, Jason, I'll start with you. Just how I think really the kind of the question is, some of these mottos I think can be misleading a little bit, for those kind of at the mid-level, maybe even VP level, just to kind of have some like presumed optimism. How are you managing that a little bit? And then as you take a look at some of the reforecasts for 2025, how are you having those conversations, not only with your teams but potentially with investors or asset managers as well? Just based on sort of this, there's essentially it's aligning perspectives versus sort of, everyone in different silos of optimism, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to be optimistic. Obviously, there's money on the line, there's investment on the line, but how do you sort of align all these players, if you will, based on current trajectory?
Yeah, there's a few components there to the question. To your first one, I think the taglines, and also to Cynthia's points, I mean, the property management world is contingent on the investment world. And right now you go to the NMHC, conference in Vegas, and you have your 5 to 10,000. It's not a huge industry. The multifamily industry is not small. And we tend to think like the most herd-like thinking that you can think of, like before you even get to that conference, pretty much you kind of have the opinion. You have 2 meetings and all of a sudden everyone's got, the sort of collective opinion. And ultimately all these people are getting paid by transacting, private equity, the institution, like everybody, you need to transact for this whole industry to go, at least for the space of fee management, institutional clients, et cetera. Owner managed a little different, although they're still trying to syndicate deals and all that. So I think that if you go in and if you're the pessimist and you're the realist, it doesn't sell, right? You got to have some comfort. I mean, like tomorrow's going to be good. Our clients have their LPs that they're trying to communicate to, pension funds, what have you, like invest with us, keep your capital with us. We're going to have an opportunity to deploy it. If you don't have optimism, then what do you have? So there's that piece. I think you got to maintain some cautious optimism in all cases. Now you get sort of up to the crux of the second part, which is when you have to be realistic. And I think with clients, they want to know that you're doing what you can control, and the lack of performance isn't because you're not leasing well and you're not managing well. And it's really the market. And investors are smart. They know the market's the market. But there's just going to be a higher level of scrutiny. It's like, well, are concessions high at my property because you can't pick up the phone, or are they high because the market is soft? So that's probably the biggest dance isn't getting clients comfortable with the fact that the market's the market. It's getting them comfortable with the fact that they're well positioned in the market with their property management solution and their teams. So that's the dance. And when clients feel comfortable that they've got a great team, they're going to be a lot more receptive to this sort of pragmatic, realistic reforecast.
Yeah, very well said. In really aligning all the interest groups, if you will, for lack of a better term, that are interested, obviously, in the success of the asset. Chad, we'll roll your way, and then Cynthia, we'll let you chime in on this one. Essentially, how you and your team kind of see the perspective of aligning all of those interested in the success of the asset in the face of headwinds.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it all comes back to, what the intention was. It's understanding the deal well. There are a lot of, I think, there are a lot of ways to glaze over, what the business plan is. It's having full transparency between what you think your forecast is. I think a lot, we're just a really weird time. I don't know that there's a great answer for this question because there's so many ways to go at it. I don't think like Jerry Seinfeld says, there's no just regular strength anymore. It's all extra strength. I don't think anybody buys an 8% return anymore. Everybody wants outsized returns. And a lot of that I think is due to, the market volatility. And when you look at rate adjusted returns and, what the 10-year is and what the cash yields look like and the spreads against, the risk-free rate. So, in a lot of ways, when deals were underwritten, I think now, the market is recalibrated a great deal. So deals that are being done now are probably more realistic, when you look out in the horizon, whether on a 5 or a 10-year term. But what you bought, 2 or 3 years ago, 4 years ago, post COVID, your assumptions may not look so rainbows and unicorns. So it's, figuring out how do you get back as close to that, and really, buckling down on, what your process is. I think a lot of it, really comes back to your fundamentals. And, it's not always sexy. Some people say that boring deals are the best ones they do. And, I think I saw that it was like Andrew Bowen who said, is process your 5th P. And I don't think that falls into the traditional set of fundamentals, but I do think that it is a fundamental of your organization and what your process is. And so I think it's just being really transparent, making everybody understand why you're doing the things that you're doing, which I think is a lot of the educational miss that some organizations don't have from top to bottom. So the people who are on site, they don't understand why they're executing the plan that they are.
Yeah, very well said, Chad. A lot of points that you made there. Cynthia, I'll ask a little different question, but I think ultimately the question is still, how do you align all stakeholders that are involved to make sure that everybody's on the same page and realistic about whether it be a reforecast for 25 or frankly a 2026 budget and what that looks like. How do you go about it? Obviously, FPI is coast to coast, and you guys are in a lot of different markets. How do you lead and guide your teams to have those types of conversations? You probably had to have accountable amount of those conversations in your career, having been in the business as long as you have. How do you guide your teams to have those transparent conversations? And when do you get involved, or when do senior level leaders get involved in those conversations as well?
Yeah, first of all, Chad stole my thunder a little bit.
Oh, Chad.
But he said fundamentals, and really it just always gets back to the fundamentals. And yes, there's going to be market fluctuations. Again, I've been through 3 recessions. Not that I think we're in a recessionary period, but we're definitely in a soft period right now. And we've had years where rent growth has been 3, 4, 5%, sometimes 8% if they're doing a value add, right, because they're renovating the units. And I've had years where there's, flat or negative rent growth. So no matter what, on all those fundamentals, you still need to be maximizing your rent, understanding your current market, in a small demographic area, what are the other buildings getting? Really, I say it all the time. So I looked at a financial statement the other day, and payroll was obnoxiously high. And I went through and I wanted to really figure out, why is it obnoxiously high? I mean, I always tell my operators, we need to meet or beat our budget, right? Like it's our Bible. It's what we told our owner we were going to do the year prior, right? We need to meet or beat it every single month. That's where the cash flow is coming from. That is, again, that's the owner's paycheck. And I'm looking at these payroll expenses and come to find out it's almost all temps. Well, we all know you pay for a temp, it's double the price with half the work. And what are we doing here? Why can't we hire someone? Why can't we get someone that's, really has value and owns their job at the community? And how do you go to an owner and say, sorry, somehow we were too lazy to have a real employee on payroll that's going to do an excellent job, and instead I paid double the price for a temp who doesn't care at all? So, again, it's back to the fundamentals. And sometimes it is drilling down to the penny, right down to, why can't we raise this person's rent $15 extra? Like, why the pushback? Why aren't we doing what we said we're going to do? And if we can't, for whatever reason, we need to understand the why of that, and maybe figure out, how do we pivot to get to what we underwrote in our budget? So again, fundamentals for me.
Well, I actually,
for Cynthia, sorry, this is a great question, and you asked the question, but I would look to you for the answer, because you guys are all over. I would say industry principals, executives, people in our seats, like it's, we have the answer. We're very aligned. I would say you talk to property management companies, like what makes, NOI, people, all this stuff, right? Like we're not colonizing Mars, we're managing properties. It hasn't changed all that much over the last 50 years. That's, you have an apartment, you got to lease it, you got to maintain it, you got to maintain the property, right?
Put money in the bank.
So we're talking about fundamentals, talking about the basics. Why is it so difficult? And this is way off script, Tony, I apologize, but why
is it okay? That's where I'm best.
Why is it so difficult to, on the ground, actually get attention to these fundamental principles that we all know to be true for decades?
Cynthia, feel free to be super honest, because I have an opinion about why it's so difficult, to be frank. But Cynthia and Chad, if you have a thought on this.
Yeah, I definitely have some honesty here. We need to get back to basics. And, I tell people, like, property management's been around a very long time. And yes, we have these amazing prop tech, platforms where the resident can pay online. We don't have to go to the bank anymore. But it's really still back to the basics. And this doesn't matter if it's commercial or office space or retail or an apartment building. You got to put the money in the bank and reduce the expenses and make sure you're managing to your budget, meet or beat your budget. It's like, that's the fundamental. I say it all the time. And I tell my teams when they call me and they have an upset owner, the first question that comes out of my mouth, they're already going to know, are you meeting or beating your budget? Because I can tell you, you can have other conversations differently if the answer to that question is yes, we are meeting or beating our budget.
Yeah, well said, Chad. Any thoughts to why some of the teams aren't fulfilling the fundamentals? I have a lot of thoughts on this, Jason. Good question, man.
I think the one thing that I frequently come back to is I think the biggest miss within the industry is training, yeah, and just knowledge in general. Even though, universities rolled out, RPM programs, I think that I kind of thought you'd see the market flooded with more people who had secondary education specific to it, and maybe that's the case.
And RPM programs you're referring to as residential property management programs, right?
Correct. Yeah. Sorry about the jargon.
Oh, that's okay.
Violating.
Just clarify for the audience.
So, and maybe that's happening, in first tier cities and coastal markets. And maybe that's a question for Cynthia and Jason, what they've seen over the last 10 years. But I think the three of us are probably pretty good testament to the fact that we found our way into an industry and stayed there. So, which still blows my mind that, the US GDP, is 13 or 14% from real estate. It's the greatest accumulation of wealth in the world. I consider myself very fortunate to work in the industry, but people, when they come, and I know things have shifted over the last 20 years since I started managing properties, but I don't think people get the education that they're managing a 25, a 50, a $75 million property, and where I still feel, and I always will, that a property manager's largest responsibility is provide a great experience. We're still remiss in equipping them with a lot of the knowledge and the tools to understand the internal mechanisms of why. It always comes back to why. We explain the other four things really well, but nobody understands why that capital was deployed. When you look at the three buckets of how our job functions articulate to capital, the structuring, the deployment, and the management. The biggest one, probably 60 or 70% of that, is in the management of capital. So we are not giving people enough education and equipping them with the knowledge to optimize our asset performance. I don't think it's that difficult, and we're not giving people enough credit. We've just acquiesced to the fact that they're not capable of certain things, and they are.
Yeah. I think that's really well said. And Jason, thanks for the fire starter conversation. That's not on the notes, but I think it's a great question that you're asking, because ultimately I think it's the question that asset managers and owners and principals are asking is, all we're asking is, these basic fundamentals be executed on site in a consistent fashion. And I think it's the chorus here amongst the three of us is to say it is the fundamentals that are cause success day to day, quarter to quarter, year to year. I think what we're all seeing, and I think you touched on it, Cynthia, a little bit, Jason, I think you inferred to it a little bit, and Chad, you just referenced it, is the training part. But ultimately, I think teams are and they express to all of us, and I'm sure to you guys privately or through survey. I get it through direct message these days. They're overwhelmed and they're burnt out, and they're pulled in a million different directions. And frankly, I think at times, having a hard time focusing on those fundamentals, because they have a lot on their plate, and they have and they're still trying to learn technology along the way. And we talked about this kind of in our pre-conversation about some of the challenges there. I think, Jason, you said it, we're trying to solve people problems with technology problems. I think there's an intersection. I think we would all agree that there is an intersection where technology can help sort of automate a lot of these sort of basic fundamental tasks that they're asked to do. But I know, time and time again, these teams are they tell me that it's just the tasks don't seem to go away. They just continue to add up. And I think when that continues to happen, it just takes you away from what your main job is. Keep the main thing the main thing. We've talked, you say that in sports, you say that in a lot of things. I think sometimes here, unfortunately, either they can't, find a balance to all the tasks they're expected to do, and ultimately aren't able to focus on the main thing. And we all know what that is taking care of customers, day in, day out. So that's my 2 cents. I know I'm not on the panel, guys, so pardon me. I wanted to actually, I actually wanted to flip the script a little bit, because I do sense there's a sentiment of sort of a Debbie Downer, sort of budgets, like the market's tough in 25. We're projecting it to be tougher in 26. And before we get to kind of some of that fun, but boot camp talk, I'd like to actually kind of pass this around again. But specifically, Jason, I'll start with you. In what are a couple areas of optimism that you're excited about in not just the remainder of this year, but like as you look at 26, where are some of those silver linings? I think it's important for those listening not to get too frown face, right, about the future, but to say, oh, Jason thinks, there's some opportunities here. Him and his team are looking at silver linings here or maybe there. Feel free to express some of those optimistic perspectives.
Yeah, I would say I'm neutral for 2026 at this point. I think the Pacific Northwest, and I would say optimistic, and I'd put my own money here in this market, because we do have the supplies dropping off. It's very difficult to get new developments to pencil. It is So at the end of the day, supply in the Pacific Northwest, and I can't speak to other markets, Sun Belt, all that. There's a different supply story everywhere. But in our market, it is dropping, and provided demand maintains. We got the best employers, Amazon, Microsoft. You got everybody. So Seattle's got some meaningful drivers. We should see rent growth. And in fact, if history repeats itself, it's all about demand at this point. We know the supply, like there's just not cranes, right? It's demand, and that's jobs. And so who knows, that's a difficult picture. We got the treasury, we got a president who's a wild card, we got all kinds of things that are creating uncertainty. But if it holds, we should see very meaningful rent growth. We're talking not, double-digit rent growth. Now in Washington, you can't get that on renewals, but if you look at the history, we could see sustained, high single-digit rent growth for multiple years in a row.
Yeah, I mean that's incredibly optimistic. Are you looking at sort of a 12 to 36 month outlook there versus just kind of a 6 to 12?
And that's the hard part. I would have said the same thing in 2020, this exact same time in 2024, because it's hard to know exactly when these properties are going to deliver, with
and the point that you're making is you potentially would have been wrong at that time.
Exactly.
Right?
But it's not going to change, the supply story is not changing. It's just a matter of timing.
Right.
And so the economy, I think, is softening a little bit. Like we're getting better candidates and when we're getting better candidates, like 3 years ago, to hire somebody on property management was good luck. Can't get maintenance, can't get anybody. Right. I'm getting feedback that, finally we're getting, finally it's the employer's market again. That's good for us, but also signals some softness in the job market. So it's a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah.
And so this, you have, CoStar uses, I think, Oxford, Axiometrics uses, everyone's got their economists that are trying to predict job growth. Nobody can do it. They're all going to be wrong. So that's why I say I'm optimistic. It's just it's a matter of when.
Yeah, and the timing's hard to pinpoint. Chad, I'll sort of pivot over to you. Thanks, Jason, for that answer. Appreciate the optimism for your given market and other maybe sub-markets as well. Chad, is there some silver lining that you and your team are looking at, for the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, and I bought some of Jason's tea leaves on the way in, so looking forward to seeing how those read out. But no, I think that we are, I'd say, more than cautiously optimistic. I think that we're, given the market that we're in, location, again, the Midwest, we feel like we're better insulated from a lot of volatility. That's not to say that we are completely protected against it in terms of rent growth. I think that that's probably the biggest upside for us when I look at still 10 and 12% trade outs right now, headed into the fall. Yeah, occupancies softened some, but we've seen some good things, and like continuing to institutionalize but not make bureaucratic our process, and standardize some things, sharpen our pencil there just to get better in terms of internal operations. I think the place where I get more concerned is on the expense side, just with what's going on geopolitically, globally. When you look at insurance, things that things have a national impact that can affect you locally. I think those are the bigger outliers in terms of things that can't be quite as closely forecasted right now. So that's where I tend to look at things a little bit more skeptically. But so I'd say I'm buying more into the revenue side, and I'm a little bit more cautious about the expense side. But I think that all in all, given our position in the market, I feel pretty good about 2026.
Good. That's good.
And just to piggyback on that, Chad, and just for the prop tech in the room, we want to see expenses go down on admin and marketing. Your question, if AI is changing things, why am I paying so much more? Like, why don't we start with just making the basics cheaper before you're selling me this dream of all, my 5 chat bots and, all this stuff. So that's the approach we're taking is, let's get the existing costs down. So I'm not convinced that controllable costs need to go up at all, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, appreciate you having that take there. And obviously, I have a next question coming up. But Cynthia, before I get to that sort of technological question for the future, Cynthia, any sort of bright spots that you're seeing in the future?
Well, I'm an optimist. So, and again, I've been through 3 cycles at this point. So, and I have owners that bought at the right time and they're still doing well. It still gets back to fundamentals. I do think that there's some costs that we can't control. Insurance, like you said, Chad, definitely that is quite a dumpster fire right now. And utility costs is really difficult, right? So whatever you can do to mitigate utility costs, whether it's, more efficient, boilers or solar at your property, you kind of have to think outside the box when there's things that you cannot control. And then again, it's always the fundamentals, getting back to just operating your building as best as possible so that you are ready when the economy flips the script and we can have higher rent increases and get more income. So.
Yeah, well said. I appreciate all of your honest opinions, and obviously you're looking through it. Obviously you have a lot on your shoulders, a lot of investors, a lot of people that you work with as well that they want to hear only optimisms. And so I could tell that you found a really good tone of balance. Of listen, there's some bright spots, but there's still some headwinds ahead, and we're focused on those and trying to be prepared for those. And ultimately, what I'm hearing from the three of you is, fundamentally, be as sound as your operations possibly can be, so that when the headwinds do reduce, you can really kind of take off and start flying when the economy does take off as well. Hey, listen, we had the boot camp term in the title of today, so let's get into that. Obviously, that's a kind of a funner, lighter topic, so we'll transition to that a little bit. Now, some of you may have been and orchestrated your own boot camp. Some of you may have not. I think you're probably hyper aware of these. There's a lot of discussion online about budget boot camps, and it seems as though property managers and regionals and others, really enjoy these. It's a fun way to kind of bring teams together. I'd love to get your perspective from the chair in which you sit, obviously, in sort of a high-ranking position within your org. The pros and cons, the positives and negatives of this type of team event. For someone who's been a part of those, there's, for me, it's very easily to articulate, there's some good, but there's definitely some, we'll call it, I don't want to call it bad, but maybe some distractions, right? You're hanging out elbow to elbow with your friend property manager, and I'm here to focus on a budget. So I'm sure, there's some thoughts on that. Cynthia, it's a fun topic. I know you've probably been a part of many budget meetings, whether it be boot camps or meetings or team bonding activities to review budgets. Tell us what your perspective is on these budget boot camps, if you will.
Yeah, I actually 100% think they're positive, as long as whoever there is picking up a nugget of information. Yeah. We talked earlier about the lack of education in our industry from our ops teams. And, I asked the question when I interview people, what's GAAP, generally accepted accounting practices? Right. I think 1% know that. And here's the thing, I don't expect them to know what that is. However, I do expect them to really understand the financial, and a budget boot camp really gets you there. When I used to do my budget boot camps, I would get, I had 10 buildings in Reno. I'd get them all together, all the community directors in Reno. So they're all in the same geographical location. And I literally went down every single GL code from, the income side to the expense side, and talking between the groups, how that hits the P&L, who your landscaper is, how much does he charge you per month? What does that work out per unit? Just that real micro digging in information is so valuable. And if you can learn, something, which I'm hoping they're learning a lot, and these are our future leaders, right? We're trying to build our bench. You hope that community director becomes a portfolio manager, or maybe becomes an asset manager, or a vice president of, portfolio, whatever, right? You're building that bench. And I've even had budget boot camps where I invited assistant managers, because guess what? That's going to be the next CD, right? Mm-hmm. And also they have to own what they're putting in their budget. They need to own it, embrace it. I've even had boot camps where we had the maintenance team come in and we spend 4 or 5 hours just working on the part of the budget that is maintenance driven, and having them own the process where, what can we do to save money? Can you go out and rebid your painting costs? Can you, paint a couple units yourself more? That saves time, and really getting them to understand how, like my conversation earlier about a temp, paying twice the money. And literally that's just a small thing. Like, if we could not just tell the PM, why are we paying for the temp? You already saved money. So it's those little things. And then an open dialogue. If they have what they call a silly question, no question is silly, so that they understand the process.
Yeah, I think you have a great perspective. It's a room of shared information, and obviously you have some seasoned budgeters in that room, and probably some newbies. And depending on who you invited to the room, there could be a lot of shared information. And ultimately, I think sort of a team camaraderie or synergy amongst the room is never a bad thing, as long as it's obviously somewhat productive. Chad, I'm going to pass to you before I go to Jason, but Cynthia was sunshine and rainbows on that one. So you're going to have to maintain that level of energy, Chad, which I don't know, we'll see. But Chad, your thoughts on this? Just teasing me.
I really think it depends on like what resonates with the team. For me, the way I used to prepare my budget when I was on site was to lock myself in my office for like 3 days, and it looked like a tornado hit it. And so the idea of going and putting me in a room and expecting me to do a lot of focus work is probably not the best for me. People are probably like, just depends on what gives you the best work product, I think. Sure. But any chance to have an interaction with the rest of the team, I think, is fantastic to socialize that. For me, I think the bigger opportunity is to go over the framework of how you're putting budgets together, like why you're doing certain things, potentially have someone from your portfolio or your asset team talk about the why behind it, to talk about, the investment, why the investment was made, and how those things actually work. So people have context behind why they're putting, the budget together for the year and how important it is. If it's a 10-year hold, this is, 1/10 of the interval of time that you have to make this investment a success. If it's a 5-year hold, this is 20% of the investment here. So just for people to have that context and really go through like how you approach the budget, I think is important to just really get that architectural understanding behind it. It's property management, so there's always the opportunity for a boondoggle. So I think you have to be careful about letting people left to their own devices too much. But no, want them to have fun. Have those good contact points, talk with the corporate team, and have good synergy there to understand what the direction is going forward. But I don't think you can lose either way. It's just a matter, again, of what resonates with the team.
Well, I appreciate that answer, Chad. I know you did your best to be as optimistic and positive about all of it, but I think you make some great points. Obviously, it just depends on how people work best and the environment. But I think you make a great point in that are the leaders teaching other leaders to be more strategic thinkers, and that's what obviously I think is a great value to everybody in the room. And I think you make a great point on that, Jason. I'll allow you to answer this real quick. It looks like we have a couple questions coming in that we'll try to get to for the audience. Jason, your thoughts on on a boot camp? You've heard the 2 other panelists. I don't know if you have any hot takes, but
I think it's very complicated. Honestly, the budget process is a behemoth. It's a big challenge because you're trying to carve out like a meaningful amount of focused work from a lot of stakeholders. Right. When do things ever slow down in property management? So especially in Washington State, we have HB 1217, which is an absolute nightmare. Oh, and guess what? Now it's budget season. So, they're necessary. You got to get people's attention. You got to figure out, get them out of their office. Chad got the discipline, clear his calendar, right? A lot of property managers just can't. They're just going to be too distracted. Right. Now, what is a property manager actually accomplishing? Because there's so many stakeholders involved. And by the time it gets to the owner might just rewrite the whole budget, right? Let's just be honest. So it's challenging. There's the practical side and there's also the analytic side. And So I don't have a
Which
great
is,
answer other than that.
yeah, no, I think it's a good one. I mean, it's the art and science of our business, right? I mean, I think you make a great point. I remember managers asking me, can I work on the budget, not at this boot camp, but can I go home in a quiet space and work on it? So that it takes me away from property operations just for, a portion of the day. And obviously, my sense at that time was that's fine. Obviously, let's make sure we make progress. But, if you need and it could be a library, it could be home, it could just be offsite potentially somewhere that you can actually really focus. So I think there's a lot of way. I think ultimately, there's a lot of ways to skin the cat. Let me get to. We do have one question that did come in, and I'd like to see if I can get your thoughts. You have to be kind of succinct in your answers. But when budgets aren't met, what conversation starters have been successful with owners? I think you've all had a lot of experience and closeness with the ownership group. Cynthia, like I said, we're running short on time. We may end up having to do a part 2 of this, guys. You guys have been so informative. But that question there, when budgets aren't met, what conversation starters have been successful with owners when the budget's not being met?
We're just having good understanding of why the budget wasn't met. And, I think it's important that everybody does a variance report on a monthly basis and really understands, well, I underwrote 3 turns, but we had 4.
Right.
Or on the painting side, they were full turns and we underwrote 2 paint turns and we ended up with 4 or whatever, and really understanding that. And then being able to talk to your client like, okay, we had 4 this month, but guess what? I'm not going to have, any for 2 more months. So, and, I'm always a glass half full type of a girl. But also with your teams, if you had 4 turns and you didn't budget 4 turns, it's no one's fault. It's a teaching moment, right? You didn't do anything wrong. How is this going to correct itself? So again, I think all those are teaching. Yeah,
be
they're
prepared with the
teaching
details.
moments.
Yeah, I'll just jump right along on that. So I would say, is it a crystal ball issue or a controllable issue?
Right.
A lot of times we get pinned on the crystal ball issues where it's like, look, a lot of times it's a best guess, just to the point on the turns, like, you do your best to control turnover, but you can't always control everything. So that's what it's come down to, is a really honest conversation about where did we drop the ball and where was it just a best guess that, we did our best, good faith effort, analytical shot, and it just didn't work out the way we thought.
Yeah, well said. It comes from experience, Jason. Thanks for providing that. Chad, any quick take on when things aren't meeting budget, how to have that conversation with an owner?
Yeah, it's 100% in the corrective action. Investors, it's important to understand where you've been, but they want to know where you're going. So the forward look is more important than the look back. So it's really important to understand what you're doing to mitigate those losses and to move forward in a solvent manner.
Well, that's great. Well, what I want to say to all the attendees, if you haven't had a chance to jot down your questions, feel free to do that in the chat. We may not have time in this live webinar here with just a couple minutes left, but I know the WithMe team and the team behind the scenes will work with the seasoned operators here to try to get those answers for you, potentially in a written fashion or in some sort of PDF form as well. So feel free to still chime in those questions there. I want to thank each one of you guys. I have in my notes to give one last closing remark. Not sure we even have time for that because you guys were able to cover so much today. I just want to thank each one of you guys and thank everybody, obviously, for being on today's webinar. We covered a ton, and we just want to say thank you very much for everybody who was a part of this. For the panelists, thank you guys for making some time today. Jason, I know the Thrive team is busy today, so kudos to you guys. And the WithMe team will be sending out a link to the full webinar on the recording. So if your teams are interested, panelists, and then of course anybody listening, if you want to share this with your team, we'll be sending out the full recording to those who've registered in your inbox. And again, I just do want to mention, if you do set up a 15-minute consultation or a budget lunch and learn with the WithMe team, and you sign a contract within 30 days, you get 2 months free on your service. So that's pretty cool. So reach out to somebody at WithMe, and thank you to the WithMe team for putting this together and having me be a part of it. With that being said, enjoy your afternoon. I'm sure you got a lot of work to do. All right, guys, we'll see you later. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody.